The wind howled through the jagged ruins of old Earth's capital. Once a proud city of towering structures and endless life, it was now a graveyard, silent and crumbling, with nature slowly creeping back over the ashes of humankind's ambitions. The ancient buildings, scarred by time and the cataclysm that ended humanity's reign, stood like hollowed-out giants, reminders of a past that felt more myth than reality. Zira Vox moved with purpose, her boots crunching over cracked stone and broken glass. Her body was lithe, her dark hair pulled back into a tight braid, and her expression focused, though a flicker of uncertainty danced in her amber eyes. The light from the setting sun cast long shadows, distorting the city's skeletal remains into monstrous silhouettes, but she didn't flinch. She had long learned not to be afraid of the dark. The sun had already dipped low when she reached the entrance of what had once been a grand library. The towering iron doors were half buried under rubble, but Zira's eyes brightened with a mix of hope and dread as she surveyed the ruins. This was it, the fabled library of the ancients, the one place that was said to hold the secrets of humanity's rise and fall. A place she had spent years searching for, and now, against all odds, she had found it. She crouched down, digging through the debris with a practiced hand, and after several minutes, the doors creaked open, releasing a gust of stale, dust-choked air from within. The interior was dim, but as her eyes adjusted to the gloom, she could see the outlines of shelves, the worn remnants of books, and the occasional shattered glass casing that once held treasures of knowledge. "Unbelievable," she muttered to herself. "You should have been here sooner, Zira." The whispers of the past seemed to linger in the air, but she quickly shook them off. There was no time to be sentimental. This was more important than just knowledge. It was the key to understanding what went wrong with humanity, and whether the Homo novice could avoid the same fate. She stepped inside, moving cautiously, scanning her surroundings. Her hand hovered near the holstered plasma pistol at her side, instinct urging her to be ready for anything. There had been rumors of scavengers, groups who picked through ruins like vultures, and though most of them were harmless, it never hurt to be prepared. As she ventured deeper into the library's heart, the flickering light of her handheld torch illuminated something strange. At first, she thought it was just another pile of decaying books, but upon closer inspection, it became clear that what lay before her was far more significant. A pedestal. A solitary stone plinth at the center of a circular chamber, surrounded by shelves that had long since given up the secrets they once contained. On the pedestal, barely visible under a blanket of dust, was an object. Small, metallic, and ancient, but unmistakably technology. Her pulse quickened. The artifact. The one piece of human history that might hold the key to everything. She approached it cautiously, each step bringing her closer to the object that could change the course of their future. The faded engraving on the pedestal read, "For when the past is forgotten, the future is lost." Zira's fingers brushed over the surface of the object. It was a small, smooth sphere, slightly larger than her fist. The metal shimmered under her light, though it didn't reflect in the way normal polished surfaces did. It was almost as if it absorbed the light. A faint hum filled the air. Zira froze, her heartbeat thudding in her chest. She jerked back instinctively, but the hum persisted, growing louder, more distinct. The surface of the sphere began to glow faintly, pulsing with an eerie blue light. Before she could react, a voice, deep, metallic, and cold, echoed through the chamber. "You have activated it." Zira spun around, scanning the room. The voice seemed to come from everywhere, filling the space with an unsettling presence. But there was no one there. Just shadows and forgotten remnants. "Who's there?" Zira demanded, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. "It is I, the guardian of the artifact." The voice responded, calm yet full of authority. "You are the first to activate the knowledge source in over 1,000 years." Zira's mind raced, trying to process the words. "The guardian?" She stepped back, confusion written across her face. "What are you talking about? What is this thing?" "I am the keeper of humanity's last hope," the voice replied. "The artifact you have uncovered contains the knowledge of those who came before you. The knowledge of the old world, before its fall. Zira's heart pounded. This was more than just an ancient relic. This was a direct link to the past, to the civilization that had built the stars. But why had it been hidden away? Why was it still here, waiting to be activated? What do you mean by hope? Zira asked, her voice tightening with both fear and excitement. What can you offer us? The voice was silent for a moment, as though weighing her question. Then it spoke again, this time with a darker edge. Hope is relative. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the doorway, and Zira's instincts kicked in. Her hand flew to the plasma pistol at her side, but before she could draw it, a familiar voice interrupted her. I thought I might find you here, Vox. Zira turned quickly, her grip tightening on the weapon as she saw the silhouette of a man in the doorway. Tall and posing, his black uniform insignia gleaming in the low light, Zalrin Voss stood there, his eyes cold and calculating. Zalrin, Zira muttered, her teeth gritting. I should have known. You always show up when there's something important. Zalrin smirked, stepping into the chamber with the confidence of someone who always had the upper hand. You always assume the worst about me, Vox. I'm only here to ensure the safety of this treasure. He took in the artifact, his gaze lingering on it. I trust you've learned how to control it? Zira took a step back, her fingers still wrapped around the hilt of her weapon. It's not for you, she snapped. The artifact belongs to humanity's future, not to you and your damned eternal order. Zalrin's smile faded, his voice turning colder. You're naive if you think this artifact will save you from what's coming. Humanity's history is its greatest weakness. Zira's eyes narrowed. You're wrong. The past holds lessons that can make us stronger, not weaker. We don't need to forget it, we need to learn from it. And repeat its mistakes? Zalrin countered, stepping closer. The history of humanity is a story of greed, war, and destruction. The future belongs to those who can control it, not to those who cling to the mistakes of the past. You will never control it, Zira hissed, her voice a low growl. This is humanity's chance to do better. We don't need your iron-fisted regime. We shall see, Zalrin said coldly, his eyes glinting with a dangerous light. The artifact's secrets are mine to command. And soon, so will Earth's future. The tension between them was palpable, as if the room itself held its breath. Zira knew this was just the beginning. The artifact wasn't just a key to knowledge, it was a weapon. One that could tip the balance of power. And as long as Zalrin was after it, the stakes had never been higher. But for now, she couldn't let him take it. Not yet. She would have to outwit him, again. We'll see who learns from the past, Zalrin, Zira muttered under her breath. We'll see who controls the future. The hum from the artifact pulsed again, almost as if in response, filling the chamber with an ominous glow. The game was just beginning. And Zira knew one thing, she wasn't going down without a fight. Zira's fingers gripped the edge of the stone pedestal, her thoughts racing. Zalrin's presence still lingered in the air like a thick fog. She couldn't afford to let him take the artifact, no matter what it cost. There were too many lives at stake, too many questions left unanswered. The hum of the artifact had quieted, but its glow remained steady, like a heartbeat of some ancient creature. Zira stepped back, her eyes fixed on the sphere as if it might suddenly leap from its pedestal and into her hands. Her mind churned with possibilities. What exactly had she triggered by activating the artifact? Was this what humanity's old world leaders had left behind for a future they had never seen? She had no idea. There were no clear instructions, only a voice, a cold, cryptic voice that spoke of knowledge and hope. She needed answers. You must learn to control it. The voice echoed again, suddenly filling the chamber, sending a shiver down her spine. Zira froze, the air thick with its presence. Control it? She whispered to herself. How? She had no idea where to start. The words seemed to linger in her mind, swirling like an enigma. She couldn't let it distract her, though. Not now. Not with Zalrin still out there, likely preparing for his next move. Zira gathered herself, putting the artifact's glow out of her mind for the moment. The air was still, but every fiber of her being screamed that time was running out. She had to leave. "Focus, Zira," she muttered, turning away from the pedestal. The sun had long since dipped behind the horizon by the time Zira made it to the council's headquarters in the heart of the city-state. The ancient walls of the stronghold loomed above her like silent sentinels, casting long shadows over the cobblestone streets. As she entered the guarded gates, the night air grew colder, the winds of the shattered world brushing against her skin like whispers from the past. She moved quickly through the hallways, her boots clicking against the stone floors, until she reached the central chamber where the council convened. The flickering glow of hollow screens and faint voices filled the space, but all chatter ceased when Zira entered. "Zira!" Elder Kyra greeted her, her voice sharp as always, her face as unyielding as the walls that surrounded them. "You've returned. Tell us what you found." Zira shook her head, frustration bubbling up. She wasn't in the mood for diplomacy. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. But I found it. The artifact. The one they've been talking about for centuries." Kyra's expression remained unreadable, but a flicker of something, perhaps interest, perhaps suspicion, passed over her face. "The artifact, you say? The one that holds the secrets of the ancients?" "Yes," Zira replied, her voice low but firm. "And I activated it." The silence in the room deepened. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, as if the very mention of the artifact was enough to stir a deep-rooted fear. After a long moment, Kyra stepped forward. "And? What happened?" Zira's thoughts flickered back to the voice, the way it had filled the chamber with its cold, mechanical tone. She couldn't yet make sense of it, but she knew one thing: it wasn't just a relic. It was a power, something far beyond what they had prepared for. "I don't fully understand it," Zira admitted. "But it's not just an artifact. It's alive, in a way. The voice, it claimed to be the guardian. It said humanity's last hope was inside it." "And you trust it?" Kyra asked, her brow furrowing. "That doesn't sound like something to take lightly." Zira paused. She couldn't explain why, but something inside her believed the guardian. It had spoken with certainty, as if it knew exactly what humanity needed. But Kyra was right. There was no way to know for sure. "I don't know if I trust it. But I do know that we can't let it fall into the hands of Zalrin and the Eternal Order. He's after it, and if he gets it, it'll be the end of us." The council fell into a tense silence, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Finally Kyra spoke, her voice measured but edged with an urgency Zira had never heard from her before. "You're right. Zalrin cannot be allowed to get his hands on the artifact. But we can't simply fight him with brute force. We need to understand what we're dealing with. We need to learn everything it can offer us." "Then help me," Zira said, her voice tight. "I can't do this alone. I need access to the old archives, to the data banks, anything that can help me decipher what this artifact really is." Kyra hesitated, glancing at the other council members, who remained silent. After a moment, she nodded. "Very well. We'll give you access to the archives. But you must understand, Zira, this isn't just about finding knowledge. It's about protecting the future." Zira nodded, determination flooding her chest. "I understand." The next few days were a blur of long hours spent combing through the data banks, studying everything she could about the artifact and its origins. It was a grueling process. The records were fragmented, damaged by centuries of neglect, but there were enough pieces to paint a chilling picture. The artifact had once been part of humanity's greatest technological breakthroughs, developed during a time when they had mastered space travel, artificial intelligence, and genetic engineering. It was a repository, a living database designed to preserve the knowledge of humanity's most powerful creations and innovations. But there was something more. Embedded in the data was a warning, a message hidden in the core of the artifact. It spoke of a time when humanity's unchecked ambition had led to its downfall, a cataclysm that wiped out entire civilizations, leaving behind nothing but ruins. The message was clear: we are the last remnants. We cannot afford to make the same mistakes again. The warning sent a chill through Zira as she read it. It wasn't just a cautionary tale. It was a threat, one that loomed over the Homo novice, as if history were poised to repeat itself. It was late into the night when Zira received an encrypted message from her contact within the underground network. The message was brief but urgent. Zalran is moving his forces. He's preparing to launch an assault on the outskirts of the city. Her stomach dropped. She didn't need to ask what Zalran's real goal was. He wasn't just after the artifact. He was making his move to consolidate power. The time for subtlety had passed. Zira stormed into the council's meeting hall, her heart pounding in her chest. It's happening! Zalran is mobilizing his troops. We don't have much time. Kyra looked up from the holographic displays she'd been studying. What's he planning? He's not waiting for us to figure it out. He's coming for the artifact. Kyra's expression hardened. Then we will stop him. Zira felt a flicker of hope. The council wasn't backing down. But hope alone wouldn't be enough to win this battle. They needed to be prepared. There's something else, Zira continued, her voice barely above a whisper. The artifact, it's not just a piece of technology. There's a power within it. A message from the ancients. It's more dangerous than we thought. Kyra's eyes narrowed. What kind of power? I don't know yet. But whatever it is, Zalran's coming for it. And once he has it, I don't think any of us will be safe. The tension in the room thickened as the implications of her words sank in. Zira could feel the weight of the coming storm settling over them all. There was no turning back now. Then we prepare, Kyra said, her voice hard and unwavering. We will protect the artifact, and we will stop Zalran before it's too late. Zira nodded, the resolve in her heart matching the fire in Kyra's eyes. The world was changing, and they had no choice but to fight for it. And for the first time since she'd activated the artifact, Zira felt a spark of certainty deep within her. No matter the cost, they would face this storm head-on. They had to. The future depended on it. The air outside the council's stronghold was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal. Zira could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest, the tension in the city palpable. She stood on the balcony, gazing out over the jagged skyline of the shattered world. In the distance, the first signs of the Eternal Order's assault were visible, smoke billowing from the eastern walls, flashes of laser fire illuminating the horizon. Zalran's timing is impeccable, Zira muttered to herself, clenching her fists. He wasn't waiting for the council to make its move. He was striking first, hoping to catch them off guard and seize control of the artifact. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp voice behind her. You should get some rest. You'll need your strength for what comes next. Zira turned to face Elder Kyra, who stepped into the balcony's dim light. The older woman's expression was unreadable, but her sharp eyes betrayed the concern Zira had come to recognize. Kyra had always been a pillar of strength, but even she couldn't hide the weight of the decision that loomed over them. I can't rest, not now. We don't have time to waste, Zira replied, her voice low but firm. Kyra studied her for a moment, then nodded. I understand. But the battle ahead will be a test, Zira. Not just of your strength, but of your ability to control the artifact. The power inside it is still unknown. If we fail to harness it, all of this, our survival, could be for nothing. Zira's thoughts flickered back to the cryptic warning embedded in the artifact's data, the message from the ancients. They had failed before. The question was, what would make their descendants any different? Could they really learn from the mistakes of the past, or was history doomed to repeat itself? I know, Zira said, her voice tight. But we don't have a choice. Kyra's gaze softened. Then you understand the stakes. We fight for the future, for what little humanity has left. The council had begun mobilizing immediately. The few remaining forces loyal to them had already begun securing the perimeter, preparing for the inevitable clash. But Zira knew that no amount of preparation would be enough if they didn't understand the artifact. She needed answers. She returned to the hidden archives beneath the stronghold, where the dusty terminals hummed with static. She sat at one of the older consoles, her fingers dancing across the cracked surface, calling up the data they had collected. The glow of the screen bathed her face in a faint blue light as she pored over the remaining files. The Guardian had given her little to go on, only cryptic messages about humanity's rise, fall, and the potential for redemption. There had to be more. Suddenly, the screen flickered, and a new file appeared. The title read, Protocol, Activation and Control of the Artifact. Zira's heart skipped a beat. This was it. She clicked on the file, her breath quickening as lines of text scrolled across the screen. It was technical, detailed, nearly indecipherable, but one sentence stood out. To control the artifact, one must align their mind with its core. Only through unity with its consciousness can the true potential be unlocked. Beware, failure to bond will result in catastrophic feedback. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Unity with its consciousness? Before she could process further, the door to the archive slammed open. Zira whirled around, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. But it was Kyra who stood there, her face set in grim determination. Zira, we've received word. Zalrin is here. The first wave is just outside the gates. Zira nodded, the cold edge of responsibility sinking into her bones. She had been hoping for more time, but there was no more to be had. The fight was here. The battlefield was chaotic. The Eternal Order's forces had arrived with brutal efficiency, their armored troops moving through the broken streets like a tidal wave of steel and fire. The Council's forces, largely untrained civilians and volunteers, were ill-prepared for the onslaught. But they had something Zalrin didn't, the will to fight for their home, for a future that hadn't yet been destroyed. Zira took her position at the front, standing beside Kyra, who held a weapon in one hand and a comlink in the other. The distant sounds of explosions and gunfire filled the air, but Zira was focused entirely on the task ahead. Do you trust the people you're fighting alongside? Kyra asked, her voice cutting through the noise. Zira didn't hesitate. I do. Kyra's eyes met hers for a moment, searching. Good. You'll need that trust. The battle isn't just against Zalrin's forces, it's against time, against our own weaknesses. You can't carry this alone. Zira's grip tightened on her plasma rifle. I know. In the distance, a loud roar of engines shattered the stillness, followed by the sharp whine of repulsor lifts. Zalrin's transports had arrived. The first wave of soldiers was already descending upon the broken city, their heavy boots hitting the ground with thudding precision. Zira's heart raced, her fingers twitching toward the trigger. Steady, Kyra murmured. We've trained for this. Zira barely heard her. The roar of battle filled her ears as she moved with the others, ducking behind rubble for cover. They weren't soldiers, but they were survivors. And that made them stronger than any army of men. Explosions erupted around them as Zalrin's forces advanced, their high-tech weaponry cutting through the Council's defenses with terrifying ease. Zira's pulse surged with adrenaline. She fired, hitting an advancing soldier square in the chest, but there were too many. Too many to fight back. She pulled back behind cover, gritting her teeth. This isn't enough. It won't be enough. And then, like a bolt from the blue, a voice echoed in her mind. Align yourself with me. Zira froze. The voice was unmistakable. It was the Guardian. She didn't have time to hesitate. She took a deep breath, focusing on the voice. Align with you? How? You know what to do. The power inside you is a reflection of the power inside the artifact. Your bond has already begun. Now you must allow it to grow. A strange warmth spread through her chest. Her head swam with a dizzying rush of knowledge, humanity's past, its achievements, its failures, all flooding into her mind at once. She could feel the pulse of the artifact, distant yet close, beating in sync with her own heart. The world around her seemed to slow, the chaos of battle fading to a background hum. Her fingers twitched, the plasma rifle now feeling like an extension of her arm, an instrument of power that flowed through her very being. She took a steadying breath and stood tall. No, she whispered to herself. She emerged from behind cover, the world sharp and clear. She moved with unnatural precision, her shots finding their marks before the soldiers even had a chance to react. The power of the artifact surged through her, each movement deliberate, calculated. But it wasn't just the artifact's power, she felt something else, something deeper. The past wasn't a warning. It was a lesson. A warning not of failure, but of rebirth. Zira! Kyra's voice snapped her back to reality. Focus! We need to hold the line! Zira nodded, her senses heightened. The world came into sharper focus as she charged forward, her every move now a blend of instinct and ancient knowledge. The Guardian had given her the strength to fight, but it was her will, her humanity, that drove her. She was no longer just a survivor. She was the future. The battlefield roared around her, but Zira's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, where Zaurin's forces continued to surge forward. This was only the beginning. The battle for humanity's future wasn't over yet. But they had a chance now, a real chance. And as long as she stood, she would fight. The sky overhead crackled with thunder, but it wasn't a storm. It was the war, Zaurin's forces hammering against the last bastion of resistance. Zira could feel the pulse of it all, like a thunderclap that shook the foundations of her soul. The battle had escalated, and she was no longer a spectator. She had become its very center. She stood atop the shattered remains of a wall, her boots firm on the crumbled stone, scanning the chaos below. The city's streets were a battlefield. Broken vehicles, fires, and twisted metal littered the landscape, while the distant roar of battle rang out with relentless fury. Zira's hands trembled, but not from fear. It was the power coursing through her veins, the artifact's influence wrapping around her like a second skin. Zira! A voice snapped her back to reality. Kyra's face appeared over the rubble beside her, her dark eyes sharp with focus. We're losing ground. We need to fall back, regroup. Zira shook her head, not even glancing toward her. The weight of the battle seemed irrelevant now. They could regroup, but only if they had the artifact's full potential. Only if she could master what lay within. I can't fall back, she said, her voice fierce. We hold this ground. I will make them understand we're not just some broken remnants. We are humanity, and I will make them remember why they should fear us. Kyra's gaze softened, but only for a moment. You're not alone in this, Zira. Don't make the same mistake they did. Zira's eyes narrowed as the world around her seemed to blur. The Guardian's presence was growing inside her, a constant hum at the edges of her consciousness. She could feel the artifact calling to her, its influence spreading through her like wildfire. There is no turning back now. Only forward. I won't fail, Zira murmured, more to herself than to Kyra. I can't. Kyra watched her with a mixture of concern and respect, but she didn't argue further. The ground trembled as another round of artillery slammed into the city's defenses, sending plumes of dust and debris into the air. Zira turned her attention back to the horizon. The first wave of Zaurin's elite shock troops was closing in, their sleek battle armor reflecting the dim light of the smoke-filled sky. The odds were stacked against them, there was no question about that. But Zira was no longer the woman who had entered this battle with uncertainty. The Guardian had shaped her into something else entirely. As the shock troops closed in, Zira lifted her rifle and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Her aim was flawless, a deadly precision that felt almost unnatural. Soldiers dropped like flies in her wake, their screams silenced by the crack of energy blasts. She moved with a grace she had never known before, every step calculated, every shot perfectly timed. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for dominance. Yet, despite the relentless wave of Zaurin's forces, Zira felt the weight of their presence. There were hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, all closing in on her position. And soon, they would overwhelm the Council's defenses. Her forces, however brave, were too few. Kyra's voice cut through the haze once more. Zira, we need the artifact's true power now. We cannot win this with just weapons. You know that. Zira paused mid-step, her gaze flicking toward the crumbled remnants of an ancient tower nearby, a signal she had long been waiting for. The tower had once been a center for communication, its ruins now nothing more than a faint memory of a lost age. But deep within, in its core, lay a communication device that could bridge the gap between her and the artifact's deepest reserves of power. Her lips curled into a determined smile. I know. And I'm about to use it. The ruins of the tower were eerily quiet, a sharp contrast to the cacophony of war just outside. Zira moved through the wreckage, her mind focused on the pulse of energy that now seemed to emanate from her very core. The Guardian was guiding her every step, urging her toward the heart of the tower. She reached the center of the structure, the remnants of ancient technology still flickering weakly. In the dim light, Zira could see the faint outline of a control panel buried beneath debris. Her fingers brushed against it, sending a shock of energy up her arm as the panel hummed to life. A holographic interface sprang into existence, and Zira didn't hesitate. She knew exactly what needed to be done. She reached out, connecting with the system, and instantly, the image of the artifact appeared before her, a glowing orb of shifting light. You're here. The voice of the Guardian echoed in her mind, the words coming through with greater clarity. You are ready. Zira's breath caught in her throat. What do I need to do? Align with me fully. The Guardian commanded, its tone both urgent and patient. Together, we will reshape the future. We will make this world ours again. Zira's heart pounded as the energy surrounding her intensified. The artifact's influence surged through her, its power overwhelming. She could feel it, like a storm cloud breaking, an endless expanse of knowledge and force. It wasn't just a tool. It was a force of nature, a living, breathing entity that could reshape the very fabric of reality. She closed her eyes and let herself be consumed by it. Her mind expanded, and with it, the world around her seemed to slow. She was no longer just Zira. She was something more. The ground trembled once more, but this time, it wasn't the enemy's artillery. It was her power, rippling out from the center of the tower. Zira's eyes snapped open, glowing with an intense energy that mirrored the artifact's own. She could see it now, the entire battlefield, the forces of the Eternal Order, the hopelessness that clung to the Council's defenses. She could feel the death in the air. I understand you now, she whispered, the words a prayer and a vow. I won't let them destroy us. She raised her hand, and the ground before her split open. The energy in the air condensed, coiling around her as she channeled the artifact's power directly into the earth. The resulting blast sent shockwaves through the battlefield. Buildings collapsed, debris flew, and Zalrin's forces staggered backward, stunned by the raw energy erupting from the ground. The chaos was instant, overwhelming, and terrifying. Kyra's voice crackled through her calm. Zira! What the hell did you do? I've just begun. Zira replied, her voice cold, calm, and unyielding. On the battlefield, the Eternal Order's soldiers reeled, disoriented by the surge of power. But Zalrin wasn't one to back down so easily. His personal guard, elite warriors clad in the darkest armor, moved forward, undeterred by the devastation. From the midst of the chaos, Zalrin himself appeared, his tall, imposing figure cutting through the smoke like a shadow. He was a man with a purpose, a leader who believed his vision of a new world could only be realized through control, through destruction. And in his hand, he wielded a weapon unlike any other, a dark energy blade, pulsating with lethal intent. You think you've won, Zira? Zalrin's voice boomed across the battlefield. This world belongs to me. No artifact, no power, no human force can stand in my way. Zira's gaze locked onto him, her eyes burning with unrelenting fury. This world belongs to no one, Zalrin. Not you, not me. It belongs to the people who are willing to fight for it. The ground beneath her feet began to shift as the artifact's energy swirled in the air, feeding into her. With a fierce cry, she unleashed the full force of its power. A beam of light, brighter than any star, shot forward, striking Zalrin's weapon. The clash of energy was deafening, sending ripples of light across the battlefield. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a final, deafening crack, the light consumed everything. Zira's vision blurred as the light engulfed everything. For a moment, she was weightless, suspended in time itself. The deafening roar of battle faded into a distant hum, as though the universe itself held its breath. Her pulse raced, her senses overwhelmed by the torrent of energy flowing through her. The artifact's power was unlike anything she had ever imagined. It was as if she had become the very embodiment of creation and destruction. The energy surged through her body like fire, searing and raw, yet somehow, it felt natural. It felt right. Her thoughts swirled in a vortex of impossible possibilities. Humanity's legacy, its mistakes, its triumphs, its failures, all of it was laid bare before her. She saw the vision of what could be, a future where humanity rose once again, stronger and more resilient than ever. But she also saw the darkness, the temptation to wield this power for selfish gain, to fall into the same traps that had destroyed them once before. She felt the Guardian's presence within her, calm and steady. "You must decide, Zira. The power is yours to command, but it will shape you. What you choose to become will define humanity's future." Zira's mind raced. She thought of her people, of the Council, the survivors who had fought so hard to hold on to their world. But more than that, she thought of the generations to come, the children who would inherit whatever world she helped create. She couldn't let this power consume her. She couldn't become like Sauron, blinded by ambition and greed. With a deep breath, Zira focused on the essence of the artifact. She anchored herself to the core of it, letting its power flow through her without surrendering to it completely. She became a conduit, not a master. The world around her came back into focus, and the light began to dissipate. The ground beneath her feet rumbled, cracks appearing in the earth, as the very fabric of reality seemed to shift. The battle outside had not stopped. In fact, it had escalated. Zira's eyes snapped open, and the battlefield came into view, still a war zone, but now, something had changed. The power in the air was palpable, crackling with energy, as if the world itself was on the brink of transformation. She was no longer just a soldier. She was something else entirely. The Phoenix, she thought. The one who rises from the ashes. Outside, the soldiers of the Eternal Order were regrouping. Sauron's elite had been thrown into disarray by the explosion of power, but they were not weak. They were trained, disciplined. They rallied around their leader, even as Sauron's form was obscured by the cloud of dust and smoke. Zira could see him, standing tall amid the chaos, his dark blades still crackling with energy. He was formidable, but Zira had felt his presence. He was not invincible. His arrogance had blinded him to the true nature of the artifact. He thought of it as a weapon to control, a tool to bend the world to his will. But he was wrong. With a steady hand, Zira reached out, her fingers flexing as the power of the artifact surged once more. The earth beneath her feet cracked open, and from the depths, columns of pure light shot up, searing through the darkness like celestial beams. The sky itself seemed to split, as if the heavens had opened. "Sauron!" Zira's voice rang out, amplified by the force of her will. The battle quieted for a moment, as all eyes turned toward her. She could feel the shift, the moment when every living being on this battlefield realized that the power had truly shifted. Sauron's expression was a mixture of shock and fury as he raised his blade, the dark energy around him flaring. "You think you can stop me, girl? I hold the future in my hands." Zira's eyes were unwavering as she took a step forward. "The future doesn't belong to you, Sauron. It never did." Without a word more, she summoned the full force of the artifact. The ground trembled beneath them, and a surge of energy erupted from Zira's outstretched hands, crashing against Sauron's dark energy like a wave against a cliff. The two forces collided with an explosion that sent shockwaves across the battlefield, shaking the very foundations of the city. The ground buckled, and the air grew thick with the sound of tearing metal and crumbling stone. Zira pushed forward, her will strengthening, her resolve unwavering. Sauron staggered, his blade flickering as he struggled to maintain control of the dark energy. "You cannot control it!" he roared, his voice tinged with desperation. "This power, this is beyond you!" But Zira didn't falter. She focused on the center of the storm, her connection to the artifact unwavering. She didn't need to control it. She needed to release it, to let the power flow through her and into the world, reshaping it into something new. With a final, decisive cry, Zira unleashed the full force of the artifact's power. The light exploded outward in a brilliant flash, engulfing everything in its path. The shockwave rippled through the battlefield, sending Zauren and his forces reeling. The energy around Zira crackled with intensity, but it was no longer just destruction. It was creation. It was transformation. When the light finally faded, Zira stood alone in the center of the battlefield, the remnants of Zauren's forces scattered in the wake of the explosion. The city lay in ruins, but it was no longer a city of death. It was a city on the edge of rebirth. Kyra and the others slowly approached, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. Zira's body still pulsed with the energy of the artifact, but it was no longer overwhelming. It was a part of her now, and she had learned how to wield it without losing herself. Kyra placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "You stopped him." Zira nodded slowly, her gaze sweeping over the devastation. "It's not over. We have much to rebuild." But as she looked out over the horizon, a flicker of hope ignited within her. They had won. They had fought with everything they had, and they had emerged victorious. The battle for humanity's future was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Zira could see a way forward. The phoenix had risen from the ashes, not just of a world, but of a species. And this time, humanity would not fall again. Epilogue: the dawn of a new era. The sky above was no longer filled with smoke and fire. It was clear, almost serene in its quiet beauty. Zira stood at the edge of the ruins, looking out at the land that lay before her. The battle had been won, but the true challenge was just beginning. With the power of the artifact now in her hands, she had a responsibility, not just to protect the survivors, but to rebuild. To guide humanity into a new era, one where its past mistakes would not define its future. She would have to navigate the difficult path of leadership, the balance between strength and compassion. But Zira knew this: they were not alone. And they would never be again. Humanity had fallen once, but it had risen stronger than before. And now, they would build something new. The future was theirs.